right, it's 6 o'clock, so we'll get started now. I'll just ask that anybody who's not speaking, if you have yourself on mute, so that we can hear the speaker. Good evening and welcome. I'm Jody Barbarchak, president of Tri-County Federation of Democratic Women. Our organization promotes the appointment and the election of Democratic women to responsible positions within all branches of government, encourages the advancement of women in both the public and private sectors, and advocates the principles of the Democratic Party. We primarily serve Dauphin, Cumberland, and Perry counties. This evening, we're honored to have speaking to us Lois Herr. Lois has worn many different hats in her lifetime: author, activist, elected official, farmer, trailblazer, teacher, and congressional candidate, to name a few. Born in Hershey, Pennsylvania, Lois graduated from Elizabethtown College. She went on to receive a master's degree from the University of Pennsylvania and an MBA from Fordham University. Lois became a card-carrying feminist working as a manager for AT&T. She went on to have a successful 26-year career in the telecommunications industry. Lois also served as a presidential inter-exchange executive working under President Gerald Ford in the White House Office of Management and Budget. Her political career includes having served as executive director of the Lancaster County Democratic Committee and chair of the Lebanon County Democratic Committee. In 2013, Lois was elected to Mount Gretna Borough Council, where she still serves today. Tonight, Lois will share with us the story of how she helped change how AT&T treated women and minority employees, setting a standard for other corporations as outlined in her book, Women, Power, and AT&T, Winning Rights in the Workplace. So now please join me in giving a warm Tri-County welcome to Lois Herr. Take it away, Lois.
Thank you very much. It's just a delight to be here and to do this. It's a combination of my feminist and political career. And I see my friend Olga Mitchell's on. She's from Cape Cod now, but she worked at Bell Laboratories when all this was going on. Women, Power, and AT&T, Winning Rights in the Workplace is really an adventure story that was told in this book. And what I'm going to do is talk about that adventure and then talk about how I think it's relevant to today. I think it is. I think we still have a problem in equal opportunity for women. Honestly, we thought we'd make more progress in 50 years than we did, particularly in pay equity and equality and job opportunity. But these articles tell a different story. And you can look in almost any publication and you will see stories about how women are being threatened, whether it's in academia or in the job. You'll see stories about life is changing, work life is changing, and what that means in terms of gender equity. And of course, the old pay gap is still here. This particular article talked about how women in the executive suite are not compensated equally with men in the executive suite. So maybe the problem has just risen to a higher level, but we still have the same problems. Now, of course, we do have examples of success. We have a woman vice president. We got good statistics in some areas, but I would argue we still face discrimination, both personally in our daily lives and structurally in the places that we work. Now, in the 1970s, I was just turning 30 and working for the Bell system, which was known then as AT&T, and it had 1 million employees, known affectionately as Ma Bell. Ma Bell had telephone companies across the country. Wherever you lived, almost, you may have had a small independent company, but the odds were you were served by a Bell system company. That company had 1 million employees, and 51% of them were women. They thought they were doing a good thing. But they were about to be charged that year with being the single largest discriminator against women and minorities in the country. That was a major case. It ended up in a consent decree that required affirmative action, back pay, job opportunities for women, and set a standard for a lot of other companies at the time. So let's go back to these 50 years ago. I worked at Bell Laboratories at the time, which was a part of the Bell system, and AT&T was the corporate headquarters. AT&T decided to file a rate increase. They hadn't raised their long distance rates for years, but in November of 1970, they filed to raise their rates, and they filed with the Federal Communications Commission in Washington, D.C. Enter this guy, David Kopus. David was fresh out of Harvard in the Peace Corps. He was a fledgling lawyer with the EEOC. One morning, reading the Washington Post, he saw about the rate increase that AT&T had filed for. And he had the idea of filing an intervention in the case and charging AT&T with discrimination, which made the rates higher. Now, we actually never proved that, but it got a foot in the door. He went into his office, convinced his bosses to file this intervention against the largest corporation in the country and charging it with discrimination. Remember, this is the 70s. This is kind of unheard of. David assembled a team, and this team was kind of looked like the 70s. They were digging into charges of discrimination. They went over anybody that had filed a case against the Bell system. They needed also to know what the structure of the company was and how they were organized, how they promoted people, what jobs they had. Well, guess who helped? Those of us inside the business helped to provide that information. During the case, we would talk behind the scenes, and David and his friends would ask AT&T for information about where the women were, where the minorities were, etc. And this is the corporate attorney who responded. Now, you might even notice a bell on his tie. How typical and how different from David. It's David and Goliath in this case. But AT&T turned over everything they asked for because AT&T thought it was a good employer. And for its time, I guess it was. But times had changed. We had the Civil Rights Act, we had the EEOC, and they were being charged in public. The FCC agreed to hear the case and set aside hearings for the next year. But before they could get to the hearings, the EEOC team and David took his team into research into everything they could possibly do. They spent a year at this. And then they went to Graves Mountain Lodge in the Shenandoah Mountains, into that cabin in the right. And they stayed there for quite a while, writing their findings, building the case. They worked with piles of paper. There were no laptops then. There was no internet. They barely had phone service where they were. But they found real documentation of discrimination, because in those days we had men's jobs and women's jobs. We had different pay scales and virtually no paths for promotion for women or minorities. And it was all documented because AT&T kind of was like a military outfit. It had rules for everything. And in many operating companies, by the way, women couldn't wear long pants, not allowed. And even at Bell Laboratories, we talked about that a bit. So anyway, they're working on it. They put together a massive document called a unique competence. And I'm going to read this because remember, this is 1970s. This is a government agency charging a large corporation which has a good reputation at that time for management. The Bell monolith is, without doubt, the largest oppressor of women workers in the United States. Bell's women are forced either to adjust their ambitions downward to conform to the company's restrictive expectations, or to seek more rewarding work with another employer. And don't forget, all this stuff hit the newspapers. This is a concluding statement from the summary. Bell's policies toward women are morally and ethically indefensible. And since July 2nd, 1965, they have been against the law. Can you imagine something like this happening to a corporation today? Maybe. But while this was going on, we were active. David had a little help from the rest of us, not just with information, but the National Organization for Women had protests. You remember the map with all the companies? Well, everywhere there was a company, there was a now person protesting at the headquarters against the unfair rate increase. Those are my friends, Betty and Kathy in the front. Like I say, we all knew each other. It was part of an internal network to share information. And I kind of imply it was simple, but it wasn't. Remember, we didn't have cell phones. We didn't have internet. We didn't have Facebook. All we had were long distance telephones and letters. So it's amazing. And besides, now wasn't that big. It had only been founded in 1966. And we used to say we had 5,000 members, but that was stretching it. But they were 5,000 very active people. Inside the business, we had organizations that saw this unique competence document and said, yes, and organized internally. We had the AT&T Alliance for Women. We even had a button designed in the bell. And as a matter of fact, we talked to the people who handled the corporate logo, and they kind of were leery of us using the current one. So we used one that was slightly different with the little equal sign and the tail to the thing, but they didn't mind. We were seen as reasonable. It was those crazies out in the street they were worried about. Little did they know they were my friends. They were our friends. We were working together for the same thing. I had transferred to New York City at AT&T in the middle of this. So I was right where the action was. And we fought inside the business and publicly. I mean, we would have meetings in the meeting rooms of the company. We would send out mailers. We would have talks. People come in and talk to us. It was open. And there were some people who were afraid to be associated with it. That's true. But we ran a parallel fight inside the company for promotions, to counter sexist behavior. We did a slideshow on how sexist advertising is wrong. We kept in touch throughout the system. So I have to tell you again, this was a long event. There was the filing of the unique competence, which was the charge. Then there was the entire hearing through the year of 1972, and then settlement in 73. But 1972 was the hearings, and I could tell you all kinds of stories about these things, and they're in the book. Everything in the book happened. It's documented. It was published by an academic press. So I had footnotes galore. I had interviewed people. I checked my own resources. And of course, I'm a pack rat. So I had kept a lot of things like this button because I was writing it in the 1990s. So I had to go back and put some things together there. In California, there were some interesting circumstances because the Hispanic organizations got involved too and complained that you could call the telephone company and wait for hours to find a Spanish-speaking person. They said, let's try it in the courtroom and we'll prove to you that this works. The Pacific Bell people argued, no, you can't do that. But the judge said, sure, let's do it. So the the California Bell people walked out. They did the trial, and indeed, it took forever to find a Spanish-speaking operator. They went to New York for hearings, which were the raucous ones, because there were radical feminists there. There were operators who were angry at the way operators were treated, and there were signs and pickets and all kinds of fancy things going on. Then they moved to Washington. And in Washington, one of the now witnesses was Ann Scott. She was an academic, actually, but extremely articulate, and believe me, she cleaned their clock. She could talk about the logic behind opportunity, and they had no answer to that. So by the end of this, there was a settlement. Finally, the AT&T people and the EEOC people got together, which actually is an interesting story in itself, because the president of AT&T, Bob Lilly, was very sympathetic to this issue. He had been the president of Columbia when Columbia was shut down. He'd been in Newark when the riots took place. He had a history of understanding what's going on. And Bill Brown, the guy in the middle, in the front of this picture here, and he would talk every now and then. And I went to I guess it was Columbia's research library, and I found in his papers Lilly's little daytime calendar. And inside the cover, it wasn't his wife's name, it wasn't his secretary's name, it was Bill Brown and Bill Brown's phone number. So I know that there was a lot of negotiating that took place at that level as well. And of course, there was an award ceremony for Bill Brown and his team. They had done a great job and they were rewarded. There was at least 15 million in back pay to women within the business who hadn't had the opportunity for promotion. Now, 15 million today means nothing, but 15 million then was a shock to the industrial system. It also involved affirmative action, which was not that well known at that point, and an upgrade and transfer program that gave a path for men who wanted to be operators and women who wanted to be switching people. You know, they just opened it up. And since the Bell system was a very organized company, once they changed the rules, things started happening. It was an earth-shattering agreement. Now, when I started writing the book, I went back through all this, and it really was, we thought we had solved some things. And I'll get back to that in a minute. But for the moment, I didn't want to do that, but I did it anyway. This shows the sense of humor that the Wall Street Journal had. If I'm going to bring you food and drink, I expect to see a 15% gratuity in my paycheck. That was in the Wall Street Journal. Okay, I want to stop my share for a minute. Good. Okay, when I retired in 1990 and moved to a farm in Mannheim, I dug out all my papers. I started interviewing people. And then I went to Graves Mountain Lodge to write my book. And I stayed in the same cabin that the EEOC people had been in when they put their case together. The first printing of the book was in 2003, and it was published by an academic press. So it didn't have a very wide run, but it did okay for itself. We broke some old patterns of discrimination then and removed some barriers. And I would say, can we do it now? We see barriers now. Can we do it? What is it about the way this case was prosecuted and successful then that can help us now? And I would argue it takes three. And in the book, and from what I've said, you can understand it took activists like you and me raising hell inside and outside the corporation, but it took those activists. It took friendlies inside the corporation like Bob Lilly, who was president, and some others who understood what was at stake and were willing to help. And it took the federal government working together. I mean, after all, it took all three of them. AT&T was the largest American corporation at that time, and they changed it. Now, today we have activists, lots of us, probably more than we ever, certainly more in Pennsylvania than we had in the country back then. And there are individuals in business, there are women in high places, women in the areas where they're trying to make change. What about the government? Big difference. In the 70s, in spite of Nixon, we had an aggressive Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. It was a young agency, but it was powerful. We had a civil rights division in the Justice Department that was active and that was prosecuting. We had a Department of Labor with an Office of Contract Compliance that really had teeth. And we had a Women's Bureau in the Department of Labor that was bent on making sure women workers were counted and noticed. And I don't know if you noticed, but they've more or less disarmed the Women's Bureau under our previous executive. So we have to put some of those things back together again. You need all those three to actually bring about a major change like this. I could give you stories because a lot of the things that we want now were talked about in this case. Childcare, for example. Ohio Bell had started a trial childcare center for their workers. I mean, the company was trying to do some good things. Loretta Weeks had filed a case and won in court that she could be in a traditionally male job. People had courage from inside the business, as well as David, of course. And there was a little audacity in it because the now people called the AT&T officers and said they want to meet with them. And believe it or not, guess what? They met with them. Would that happen today? I mean, if we wanted to call, the activist wanted to talk to the head of Amazon, would he talk to him? I don't know. But we changed some personnel practices and we flew out of the 70s thinking we had solved things. Helen Reddy's I Am Woman. Is there a woman here who doesn't remember I Am Woman, Hear Me Roar? That had been drilled into our heads. We just had this success. We saw places, other successes were taking place. No longer did your credit card have to be in your husband's name. No longer would your salary not count in mortgage applications. No longer did want ads appear in men only and women only columns. Now, it wasn't all because of this case. It was what was going on at the time. We thought we had changed the world. But today, we're still fighting for more to get a balance in pay. We're still fighting for childcare and other opportunities. And all this is made worse by what we've been through the last year. And we could talk a lot about how women have been more affected by this than men. And there's still institutional as well as behavioral patterns that are keeping women back. There's so much to do, so very much to do. And at this point, I was going to show you that sense of humor thing. And to tell you that when I was down at Graves Mountain Lodge writing my book, I had my loyal Roddy Katie with me. And Sisterhood is Powerful was a book that I have always kept handy. It keeps us kind of knowing that we're in this together and that we do have power. And I think that's part of what happened in the 70s. People seized the power and made things change. And I just challenge all of us to think about how we can use the power that we have. And the word audacity keeps coming to mind. We need audacity to challenge and change what's going on that we find to be so unacceptable. So I thank you for the opportunity. This is the book. You can see the book. I got it up there somewhere. The first version had a different picture on it. This one, it just came out last summer. And of course, it came out in the middle of the pandemic. So I didn't do much advertising. I was supposed to go to the book expo in New York City. It never happened. So I may be at some point be doing some more publicity, but it's not the book that's important. It's the concept of bringing about change. And I'd welcome any questions that people have. Jody, I thank you again for the opportunity to talk about this adventure, which was probably the most exciting adventure I've been on in my life.
Thank you, Lois. Thank you so much for being with us this evening, sharing your story, and more importantly, thank you for the work you've done all these years on behalf of all women. We really appreciate it. Your story is really fascinating. I'll kick off the questions/comments. when I was reading your book, the phrase that really struck me was, it was, I believe, the first page of the first chapter, and you said, "I didn't see the walls," and that just hit me reading that. And I'm wondering what you think of women today. Do they see the walls? Do they think there's walls still? I'm interested in your perspective on that.
I think it may go by generations, because to some extent we didn't see them because we were looking at it rationally. At first we thought if we just tell people what the problem is, that'll solve it. I mean, Ogle will remember that. We tried to convince them on a rational basis that we should have these opportunities. I don't know that because of that, the successes of the 70s and 80s, I think women moved ahead without realizing that they were going to come to a similar point at some stage of their career. So I don't know. It's been a different world for each one. I will comment though that, you probably, when you said you at the beginning, I thought you were going to come up with the first two words, which were no pants. And my friends in England said I shouldn't have said that. I should have said no trousers. But in any case, Bell Labs didn't have a rule against it because Bell Labs was a little freer spirit company. But some of the telephone companies actually had rules about what their women employees should wear, and they could not wear pants. And it's cold. I was in Illinois then. It's damn cold out there in the wintertime. And I was cold. So I bought some pantsuits and I went to work. And one of the biggest surprises was that nobody said anything. I found out years later that my boss had gone to his boss and complained that Lois is wearing pants. And bless his heart, the top guy said, "Tell her she looks nice." So, times have changed, and you just have to keep a sense of humor in this too.
Yes, yes. To open it up, if anybody has questions, if you just want to, I see Bridget's waving her hand.
Lois, has anyone ever come to you to option movie rights for this? I mean, there have been so many great movies recently about civil rights struggles, anti-war struggle, and maybe we ought to be sending a copy to Ava DuVernay.
Well, in the past, I have tried some of that, but what happens mostly is I get calls from companies that want to sell me their services to do it. And we could talk about self-publishing and what it really is. You pay them to publish, you pay them to market. And there's been some recently who have talked to me about one of my other books and said, we'll market it to the Netflix. Netflix really needs these things, and then, a couple calls later, you find out it would cost you $2,000. And I don't have the kind of money to do that. So I agree with you. And if I knew people, I wrote a book called Dear Coach, and I wanted George Clooney to be my father in that book. And I sent it to him. I found out who his agent was and where he was and all that. I said, I never heard a thing. So I'd love to do it, but I don't know how. But it would be an adventure story. It would be.
We'll have to figure that out, because I had the same thought with all the movies that are being made right now. This would be a good movie. Trish, I see you're unmuted. Did you have a question?
I do. Lois, I love you, and you're one of the most positive women I have ever met. And we have two questions. One, how do you stay so positive with all of these journeys that you've been on? And I know you've had some successes, so that's the first question. How do you stay so positive with such uphill battles? And secondly, what's your next project going to be?
Okay, well, I'll answer the first question first. It was fun. And I was working with women and some men that I really liked. My husband at the time was also very involved, and we were sort of we were a band of whatever, trying to change the world, and there was a lot of fun in that. Now, my next project sort of answers the other part of your question, is how you keep positive. When I said we flew out of the 70s, I did too. And I had all kinds of plans. I was going to be CEO of AT&T by the year 2000. I had it mapped out. I believed it was possible. Now, actually, there was a woman CEO, president of AT&T at that year, but wasn't me, obviously. But my next project is a memoir, because I started writing about an experience I had between 1978 and 81, when I went into a non-traditional department of the telephone company, where I wasn't really wanted, but I had, by other opportunities, got there as a manager. And for the 3 years I was there, it was really tough. And I wrote about that, and I gave it to some friends to read, and they said, well, why did you put up with it? So now I took it back, and I'm now writing what happened between 73 and 78, because there were successes there, and I was making progress, and I thought now I could go get operational experience, and that was going to be my ticket. Now, three things happened. The government split up AT&T, which means that all my contacts across the system were now in separate companies. I got divorced. Not that that would have made any difference. It might have made the opposite. Well, anyway, that's another story. And it just got harder. It wasn't as easy as I thought it would be. You know, you can roar, I was going to play I Am Woman, but then while I was playing games with this, I didn't have it keyed up. So maybe I will. Here we are. Do you remember this? Oh, come on. Come on. Can you hear that?
I am woman, hear me roar, in numbers too big to ignore, and I know too much to go back and pretend.
But it's that lyric, it was that attitude that took me for years to any challenge I faced, I could do it. And then I ran up against that really interesting period where it was difficult, but I still succeeded. And I got to write that, because that'll be interesting. So thanks for the question.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have a question?
Lois, I do want to speak for the people on Facebook who are messaging you. You have a fan club on Facebook.
Oh, thank you.
Roseanne Romito and Pam Rice and Carolyn Shaler.
Oh, how wonderful. And Alex Ritchie just joined. Alex was part of my consciousness raising group back at AT&T. Hello, Alex. And Olga, you should unmute yourself and say hello.
Hi there.
Hi, Alex. You missed the talk, but that's okay. You know the story.
I'm really sorry. I was on a call with Maura Healy, the AG in Massachusetts. And
Okay.
it's the world of Zoom, you know.
Well, Alex was there. Alex knows this. Alex and Olga were both around. Olga was at Bell Labs. Alex was at AT&T. And I said she was my CR sister. That was true too.
Yes.
That's another, you ask about how we managed through this. It's because we had each other. It really was.
I found out about women late. I didn't even, it just didn't occur to me that there was a problem. And I was in physics, and there weren't many women in that, but it didn't matter to me. And I was just lucky, and I met the right people. I got into Bell Labs through a contact. My husband and I both finished our PhDs in physics and had a joint trip down for interview, and we both got offers. And it's really pretty amazing because somehow the offers came out exactly the same.
Oh, that was wonderful.
Which, yeah, but it was kind of I'm sure they were talking in the background. But I didn't really, when I went, I was working in a field where there were mostly men up in Toronto. And I went to a conference in New York and met somebody down there. And he was talking to me about some of the women's publications that he couldn't believe that I hadn't seen them. I was totally unaware of the women's movement. But I found out about it when AT&T got involved with trying to bring up the status of women. Of course, they were also interested in minorities, and they formed the affirmative action committees. And I was put on that, on one of the affirmative action committees. And but I actually thought that was the big problem, getting blacks into the company. Wow. Because there were a lot of women there, but they were not getting promoted. And one of my friends had graduated in mathematics, and she and her friend both got jobs. Well, he got into a stream where you could go up the ladder, and she didn't get offered that. They had identical backgrounds. It was bad. That was in the late 60s.
Yeah, and the issue of minorities, when David Kopis started this case, they honestly didn't take all the women's issues seriously. They expected this to be a case of minorities. But because the telephone companies had offices and mechanical equipment and everything in the cities, they hired in the cities, and they had a better reputation to some extent with hiring minorities than women. But they had the same problems. The only thing is, it wasn't as documented. The women's thing was really documented, like a friend of women programmers came in as TAs or as technical assistants, not as members of technical staff. And, that was clear. The minority stuff was a little harder to prove. Not to say that it wasn't there, but the women's discrimination issues were in black and white in documents filed.
Well, and it was the numbers. I mean, there were lots of women employees in the Bell system as a whole, and in AT&T as well. But when we formed a group of women in management, we could easily fit around one table. That's, therein lies the difference.
It's also true that the feminist movement has sometimes been accused of being elite women. But the case against AT&T was primarily decided on the basis of the craft women, the operators and the women in the clerical positions, not the management women, because that was actually not a part of the case. At the level Alex and Olga and I were at, it wasn't about us. Although we hoped to gain from it, it was about the women who were in entry-level positions or in the stereotyped jobs that were set aside for women.
But we ended up pushing the company from the inside, much to their great surprise. That all of a sudden there was a group of women on the inside that they had to deal with, and who were in a mirror situation with what was going on the outside the company. And some of us were, part of both of those things. And so I think, the management initially was absolutely dumbfounded that they were really caught up short. And it took a lot of education to get them to understand that there really was an issue.
Yeah, I remember when the EEOC claimed the papers were filed, the company put them on a table and there were stacks and stacks of them, and they stood around there almost saying, we don't understand what this stuff is all about. We're good. And that's one of the reasons that the Alliance got so excited, is because these guys don't get it. They just don't understand.
They did a video and for management in which they kind of made fun of it, which was a real mistake.
You must find it ironic that after the Bell divestiture and, fast forward 50 years and pretty much all those baby bells have all been absorbed into Verizon. I'm not sure how many separate Bell companies are still left, but Verizon was buying up everything in sight over time.
Yeah, when it was divested, there were 7 baby bells, but they have been divested and absorbed and merged. And I would love to have traced women through the years to see how the women who entered into the Bell system at the time of the consent decree were treated differently. Unfortunately, when divestiture occurred, the good old Bell system documentation wasn't available to me. I tracked them. It's in the book up to as far as we could, the number of women as it increased. And as Alex said, in the beginning, any women, at any decent management level could get together around a conference table. The book has some statistics about that, but that changed. And some of those women, I think, went on to leadership jobs in other companies. The women who joined after the affirmative action degree.
Lois, I might be able to put you in touch with one of those women.
Oh.
My sister Joey joined I don't know if it was still Bell or if it was AT&T. It was either 1979 or 80. She joined the company. And she eventually became a vice president. She went through many of those iterations. And at one point, she was nominated to be New Jersey Woman of the Year. And she refused the honor. I don't know which organization wanted that, but she wanted them to take out woman, best business person of the year. She'd go for that. But yeah, she had a very interesting career and went through many iterations, and it was a pretty fabulous career. One of her first projects was the AT&T was the first credit card, a non-banking credit card. That was her project. And she also worked on acquiring mobile cell towers and rights, which was quite novel at the time. And she managed to retire at the ripe old age of 46. However, the company, I think she retired from after Verizon and Lucent. Then what was the final company there? I don't know, but they just declared bankruptcy and she lost most of her pension. So she's had quite a career with them.
Well, send me her contact information. I'll get in touch with her. I have a question for her. Did she have any idea what we had done?
I don't know.
The people I've talked to, a lot of them didn't, because it became, it wasn't corporate history. It was our history.
Right. I think she still had many glass ceilings. She was always up against it and always struggling with, dealing with it all. Upper management seemed to be mostly men still, and that continued to be an issue.
What I find interesting now is I've gotten on to Forbes Women, which Forbes magazine has a vice president in charge of Forbes Women, and they have some programs on webinars and so forth. And I'm hearing women CEOs talk to each other about some of the problems that they face. Now, sometimes we're talking about business problems, but sometimes they are still talking about being left out, not having the right job, etc. So even they have, that's what that one article about women, even in the C-suite, don't always have equal pay. So,
well, and I wonder about one of those women who was Carly Fiorina, and she came to light in recent politics, especially, has it been 4 years ago?
She's one of those who was hired by AT&T, the Bell system, right after the decree.
Right. Yeah, my sister worked closely with her, so yeah. Well, as we look at women in politics, And we're excited to have, much more interest and a lot of interest at the grassroots level. What advice can you give us as an organization as we try to reach out and encourage and support women?
That's a big question, one I've been struggling with, because I have, some years ago, when I first got involved with the local party, I tried to gather the women who were running for Senate and State House in an informal network to talk to each other. And I tried to get the party to do it, and nobody did. But then we had groups like Represent PA and Emerge, and some other groups became eager to help women. So there are a lot of groups that if people say they want to run for office, they can get training. What's missing is the camaraderie of the kind of groups that we were lucky to have. Activist groups who want to change things. And politics is different because you have to get out there and do certain things as a candidate and a campaigner that are a little different than business. But I think there's an awful lot of just moral support to talk to women. I talked to a young woman who's 18 years old, who's running for township supervisor in Lebanon County. And, it's just delightful to be able to provide some just hints for this or that. I'm not going to be your campaign manager. I just want to be a coach. And I think those of us who've been through these things can serve that function, just to coach, not to be a consultant, not to be, just to be almost to be a friend.
Thanks. Yeah, I think it's lonely out there in the campaign trail.
Can be. Mm-hmm.
Lois, thanks again. We really appreciate you being with us. And once again, if folks would like to get your book, it's on Amazon, right? It's Women, Power, and AT&T, Winning Rights in the Workplace.
And
so thanks.
I want to tell you, I just started a podcast. I'm a novice at this. It doesn't have fancy music. I haven't even learned how to edit it yet, but I've posted 5. I do it on Mondays by noon, and it's called Women's Equality Journal. And it's on Spotify, Google, all those, almost anywhere you want to look, because I did it through Anchor, which made it easy, and they distributed it to the others. But, I want to stay active. I don't know exactly how, but having the opportunity to talk to you folks is just great. So thank you.
Thank you, Lois. And we're going to be turning shortly to our business meeting. But before we do, I'd just like to thank the folks on Facebook who have joined us. If you're interested in learning more about Tri-County, of course, you found our Facebook page already, but you can also find more information on our website, which is tricountyfdw.org. So thanks again for joining us on Facebook. And we're going to sign off now.